morning, Facebook and LinkedIn. It's such a pleasure to join you this morning and bring you Leadership Live Fridays, which we come to every Friday today at 10 o'clock, every Friday at 10 o'clock Eastern Time. I'm Merritt Minnemeyer. I'm the founder and CEO of Master One Coaching, and I'm joined this morning by the lovely and talented Sara Herrmann. Good morning, Sara. How are you?
Good morning, Merritt. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
It's so my pleasure. So, Sara, you are the founder and principal of North by Northeast Communications. And we always start this live conversation by asking you to tell us your story. So tell us a little bit about you, please.
Sure. Well, I'll try to keep it brief. It's a pretty circuitous path, but
It
one
usually
that's
is.
one that's punctuated by a couple of bold moves and some really great bosses and mentors along the way. So my first professional job was as a reporter and editor of a local newspaper in my own hometown, actually, which is quite an experience. And I would actually put that in the bold move category, taking that job. I didn't have a journalism degree, but I've always been super comfortable writing. That's always come really easily to me. So the actual sort of scope of skill set wasn't a stretch for me, but as a hardcore introvert, the idea of going out and contacting dozens of people every week to get stories and interviewing them, and it was kind of it exhausted me just thinking about it. But I kind of leaned into that discomfort and was so glad that I did. Oh, I forgot to turn my telephone off. How rude.
That's okay.
But I kind of leaned into that discomfort, and it turned out to be such a fantastic opportunity for me. It was a really great first job. While I was there in my last few years as an editor, I became really interested in land use and zoning issues. There were a lot of development projects that I was covering, and I really kind of took a deep dive into that, read the state statute on environmental review processes um, and and translated that interest and that experience into sort of act two of my professional life, which was working with land use and zoning attorneys in their permitting work and their environmental review work, which again was kind of an unexpected thing, and not planned for, but a really great experience with some really great bosses there. And then, fast forward a few years, I had an opportunity to kind of bring together my writing skill set and my environmental experience working in a marketing communications role for a global environmental consulting firm. It was headquartered here in Western New York. And that was where I really kind of, sort of took off, I would say, professionally. I had some really fantastic leaders in that organization, working with really super smart people doing important work. It was, inspiring. And I had an opportunity to, work with one of my initial bosses to kind of like pull together the corporate communications function for a company that really didn't have one. And that was a great experience. And then, another boss, a sort of later boss, who really recognized in me something I didn't recognize in myself, which was that I have a head for strategy, and I like to put together, um, I could sort of connect the dots within the organization. And that led to a seat at the leadership table, which was really fantastic. I don't think of myself as a corporate kind of person and never will. But having that perspective in an organization and being able to like see how different parts work together and looking at an organization sort of from that altitude, not from a hierarchical sense, but from a perspective sense, was just really, interesting and exciting every day. Um, and then COVID. I feel like everyone's story will have those three words in it, and then
Mhm,
COVID.
mhm.
So that firm was acquired by a much larger global professional services company, and so COVID hit, and I found myself in really this very enviable position of working for an organization that does amazing, just really meaningful, impactful work with a team that I loved. being really well compensated for it. And yet there was kind of something that wasn't there. There was a piece missing. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out like what exactly that was, over the course of several months, while in lockdown, trying to really put my finger on that. And I realized two things. One is what was missing for me personally in that role was the ability to really control the work that I had. So, and by that I mean like sort of the time and the focus to really put out my best work. The pace of an organization like that is just so fast paced that things come up all the time, and you put out work product that is acceptable, but not 100% of what you can put out. And that really sort of wore on me a little bit. And the second thing is more of a market trend that I tapped into, which was the fact that, COVID was kind of an instigator of this, but really more generally, companies are being asked to communicate in a different way. Business communication has really changed dramatically and quickly in that there's a greater need for transparency. And there are pressures from all different stakeholders, from investors, from clients, from customers, from employees. And there are firms that, and it seems like a simple thing to say, like, just be more transparent, like go out there and, talk more. But there are firms, especially established firms, that have kind of been, are set in their ways, the ways that they communicate with the marketplace, that really need to think through that. It changes the voice of an organization. And so I put together that kind of dissatisfaction with not having a control over my work and recognizing this market trend, and put it together into North by Northeast Communications. So I left the organization in August and launched North by Northeast in September. And so we help leaders and organizations who are ready to sort of make that leap and be more transparent in what they communicate, especially around environmental and social impact work, which is really where a lot of the drivers for this greater increase in transparency are coming from.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting confluence of events that have occurred over the last really 2 years now. It's all coming up on 2 years, right? Which is just insane to think about.
Yeah.
That what you and I talked about this before we went live too, about the Great Resignation, that trend, that movement that's happening, which is the kind of all of this time that so many people got to sit at home and go, what do I really want to do with my life? What does it really mean to me? Do I really want to be in this position? What are my values? And that there's a little bit of discomfort that comes with, more than a little bit, that comes with that kind of confronting inner conversation, making some decisions, or at least making some decisions to test what that means.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of the social, this has of course been happening all along, but the sort of peak focal points of the social revolutionary points that have happened over the last couple of years, and the environmental effects of us being from home and then not being from home, and like that being part of our global conversation, and people who are choosing to attend more to that. So all of that happening, is it like your story really encapsulates so much of that. And I hear this really so often. I'm seeing it actually in my work too, where people are making the move from working for somebody else to going out on their own. And a lot of that is about impact. A lot of that is about mission and like how I want to serve specifically. I want to be part of the solution. And I'm hearing that in your story too. You had that all along as a thread of really doing the environmental piece. So that, I think that's so fascinating. And not only is that driving you to do what you did, but it's also driving what you're doing.
Right. Yeah. I've always, I've worked, for many, many years, more than a decade, for organizations that really do have an impact, especially in the environmental space. But from a communications role, it's a little bit removed. We're were reporting on what they're doing. And those organizations were kind of like my beat, as a reporter, as a corporate communications person. And it feels good to get a little bit closer to the work.
Mm-hmm. So. Something that's really important too that I wanted to pull out about your story was that you said you had somebody who recognized something in you that you didn't know you had, and that tell me a little bit more about how leadership has played a role, because what that actually what I heard you say was another leader saw something in me, and then that led to a leadership seat at the table for me. Like you actually got a seat at the table because of that. Did I get that right?
Yeah, 100%. So
tell me a little bit more about how that has played a role in your career and in your life.
Yeah, I mean, it's played a huge role because it, number one, it allows you to think about yourself from a different perspective. You go into an organization and often start, I started as a marketing communications I can't remember, coordinator, and you kind of work yourself up. But, much like we all think of ourselves from a younger kind of perspective, even though we're getting older, I think you do that in organizations too, where you come in and in some ways where you're always kind of thinking of yourself.
Yeah.
And so, over the course of 10, 11, 12 years, I really had matured as a member of the organization, but I wasn't seeing it in myself. I was still seeing myself in many ways as that marketing communication coordinator, right?
Yeah.
Even though I was director of communications. And so to have someone else come in and recognize that, the actual work that you're doing and the perspective that you're sharing is valuable is kind of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it was kind of a turning point, really. And it, like I say, being able to see an organization and understand the challenges from that perspective is just really different. And just such a great opportunity to think of yourself in different terms. So
I think that's such an interesting way to put it, because I hadn't really thought of it that way before. But like when you come into an organization, you sort of think of yourself that way. It's kind of like with your parents, like when you leave home, right? And you're like 16, 17, 18, whatever. And you're like, oh, I'm always going to be 18 when I come back home. Because there's something about that developmental mark that just imprints on us, right? And yeah, and also I think that perspective, the change of perspective of seeing ourselves in a position of as a decision maker, that's it's scary. Whether it's something that we're doing on our own or rising up in an organization or becoming a parent or whatever it is that, when you become the decision maker, you're like, wait, no, there's no one else who's like, where's the person behind me that's supposed to actually like really know what they're doing, right?
Right.
When that becomes me, it's like, oh my gosh, I have to actually be willing to speak what I know to be true. I have to be willing to take responsibility for not only myself but somebody else. If I have people who I'm leading, and I think that is the connection to communications is really strong there, because that link to transparency and having the beat of your beat be the not just the mission and the purpose, but the operations and the day-to-day kind of practice of your organization. Is you have to be willing to be not only confident, but brave, courageous, to be able to speak out what's really happening and say whether the truth is pleasant and palatable or not, right? So I'm curious about that. What about, I didn't really prep you with this question, but it's kind of gone that way.
Bring it.
What have been some surprises that have come your way in the role of, because you are a person of great integrity, and you and I have known each other for a long time. So I know
decades, in fact.
Oh Lord, it's true. And just I didn't actually say this beforehand, but you're signing in from Western New York, and you and I met in that area, so long time ago. So tell me a little bit about something that has been surprising for you in your role as communications, either in your new role at your own firm or in another. Without, of course, I know you need to be conscientious about telling stories, but but if you could point to something that was surprising, I'd be interested to know.
Well, just to circle back a little bit to something you just said about sort of being the decider, like that was something that when I first started thinking about North by Northeast communications and bringing things together, one of the things that surprised me the most in that process was like you said, not having anyone there was no review loop that I needed to manage. Like I would write web copy and approve web copy. So in a large organization, as a communications person, there's always this review cycle that you work through, and it's a very collaborative process, and so that was a little bit surprising. But one of the things too that I think in terms of corporate communications and my experience in larger organizations is how we talk about being transparent, and it seems like I said before, like something that's like just go talk more, just go be more open about the inner workings of the organization to all of your stakeholders, but it's really a challenge. I've found, especially with established firms, with founders still there, it's something very the company is something very personal to them.
Yeah.
And so being more transparent as an organization feels like being more transparent as a person, as an individual and a leader. And I think that's where some organizations say, like, whoa, not for me.
Yeah, because it's super vulnerable.
Not for me isn't an option, but
it's really vulnerable. I mean, it's a great point. You and I both, had that experience with founders, and the founders, that they're a whole, are a whole different animal than, it's like a CEO who is not their baby. Right.
Right.
And you're right. It's very personal. It's very personal because it is something that we've created. And so it feels incredibly vulnerable to exactly. have to go out there and take responsibility, or just even speak something that is, a deep passion or commitment, right? Because we're accountable now, not only to ourselves and to our own heads, but to the public when we say that out loud.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And people are clued in then. They're going to be following what you say. And so that leads to an increased accountability, and there's risk in that.
Yeah. So why is it important to be truthful and transparent? I mean, I know that's a kind of a funny question, but like, I think we see it all the time, right? About how so many leaders are not transparent and truthful. And yet it doesn't seem to, like, and there's all this conversation about that and legal proceedings and about not being truthful. So why is it really important from your perspective?
Well, I think it's important because we're moving from this shareholder economy to a stakeholder economy, and the accountability has never been higher. The risk is really in not being open and truthful. So I think it presents a real opportunity for leaders and companies to step forward and do it well. And it creates a real risk, both legal and, the risks are kind of endless. There's legal risks, there's risks of not being able to fill roles with quality candidates because they see your organization as closed and not communicating well, and not having things on the radar that as a society we now have on the radar. Things like climate action. That's an existential threat, right? How is your organization helping to advance that? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those are things that maybe even 5 years ago were not as much of a focal point as they are now. And I just feel like it's important to be truthful because the risk is the risk, especially now, is in not being truthful.
Yeah. Well, and what you said is really, really powerful, and I hadn't heard it put that way before, which I think is just really, really important, that we're moving from a shareholder economy to a stakeholder economy. And that includes, the employees that we're bringing in. I mean, that I've hear it a lot in the context, a lot of leaders who are wanting to hire, and they get, millennials or Gen Z, they get very annoyed. What they're kind of seeing as entitlement, right? They think that they deserve X, Y, and Z, and don't they know that they're supposed to work their butts off and then not complain, like we were trained, right? Which,
Right.
Guess what? We're a generation on anxiety medication, so
Yeah, exactly.
There may be a connection there, yeah. So, and really, what I see is happening is, I mean, of course, this is a broad stroke, but that the generations coming up now are saying, no, boundaries are important. Well-being is important. Accountability, connection, understanding our client, our world, healing that is it is existential, and not in a sort of philosophical way, but in fact, immediately. It's not a someday thing; it's a right now thing, and they're understanding it in a way that our generation and generations before us haven't quite grabbed onto, and so they're making demands of leaders now, which some of us are very uncomfortable with, because we just weren't comfortable making those demands, or we didn't see them as necessary, or we were trained to keep our head down and not say much. I see this all the time, and so I see people I'll include you in that generation, sometimes struggle more with this idea of being transparent than people who are younger than us, coming up and saying, no, this has to happen. And of course, again, it's a broad stroke, but what's your viewpoint on that? Do you think that's also true? Or?
Absolutely. And I think social media plays a big role in that. I mean, we have a generation, my kids, who have grown up sharing.
Yeah, it's true. They're sharers.
That's another episode.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's true.
But yeah, their level of transparency, and it's not always authentic transparency, it's social media transparency.
Right.
But they grew up with a platform to share their ideas,
yeah,
and to share their concerns. And so when they go into an organization that isn't doing that same thing at that same level, doesn't have that same level of disclosure, it just doesn't click with them. I totally agree with you that it is largely generational, not to make broad strokes, but yeah, even I, who am a transparency advocate, so to speak, sometimes I think about some of the disclosure sort of focus areas that people are talking about, and I'm like, whoa, that's kind of a lot. But increasingly all of those walls are going to tumble. I mean, look at the advances we've made just in the diversity, inclusion, and equity space, in the last 5 or 10 years.
Yeah,
it's pretty amazing. We're moving pretty quickly.
It is pretty amazing. We talk about that for a long time. Actually, I used to do that when I was living in Western New York. That was the work that I did, was diversity work. So, so yeah, I mean, and we could talk for hours about like the performative aspects of social media, and is that really authentic truth, or is it it's sharing, but it's not really sharing authentically, or maybe it is, and maybe it's oversharing, or maybe where the boundaries there. We're all finding our way, I think, with that.
Yeah.
So maybe we should come back on and talk about that another time.
I would love to.
All right, great. So we're at the point now, though, where I would ask our guests, if you had one golden nugget of wisdom to drop for our audience today, what would that be?
Well, I would say, I don't know that it's a golden nugget exactly, but there's a quote that's always really resonated with me. I actually included it on my website. And it's from a Persian poet. I hope he's not controversial in any way, but the quote is, the words you speak become the house you live in. And to me, that speaks to the need to use language really intentionally as leaders and as organizations, but especially in a leadership role. I think sometimes we forget how impactful our words are. And so, these are the language we use kind of resonates in people's minds for weeks, years, sometimes it never leaves. And so I feel like we need to take that really seriously. The fact that we're taking up real estate in someone else's mind. And when we're having especially difficult conversations, thinking through, what's the best way to say that? What is, how can I sort of be really crystal clear, but not leave a kind of negative residue in someone's mind? I think language is really, really powerful. And, if somebody says something that's hurtful, that doesn't go away in that person's mind. The flip side of that is, I think one of the greatest compliments you can give someone is to say, I've been thinking about what you said, because it means that that person has taken your thought, your idea, and really advanced it within their own mind. So I would just say, be careful and intentional and thoughtful in the way that we communicate as leaders, because sometimes it's important that what lives in someone's mind after a conversation is positive and useful. So I guess be kind is the broader message there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it reminds me of I've had conversations with my kids all the time about, they'll say, well, I'm being honest. Like, well, just because it's true doesn't mean it needs to come out of your mouth. Like,
Exactly.
Right. So, and they had a campaign at their middle school a year or two ago, and it was, is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? Does it need to be said? Do I need to be the one to say it? Right.
Right. Exactly.
And kind of run that through the rubric before it comes out of your mouth. And that's hard for a middle schooler to do because they're so impulsive. It's hard for adults to do, frankly.
Yeah, sometimes it is.
Yeah. And speaking to that, because kindness is not just about nice. This is another thing we talk about in our house all the time too. Kindness is not just about being nice or not nice. Kindness is about being thoughtful of how it's going to be received. Like,
exactly.
Right, when you are in a community, we're in a family, when you're in a professional community, when we're in a global community, we all are going to affect each other in some way. And we are all connected. We really, truly are all connected. And so especially now with all the, media sources and outlets and access to anybody's thought at any time of day, anywhere, we can have incredible impact. And that can be really useful, and it can be really hurtful. It can be really empowering, and it can be really damaging. And it's hard to remember that when you're like, when we're sitting here doing this and we're like, oh, I'm my own little universe, my own little island. But in fact, even when we're all alone, when we have this incredibly powerful tool here, whether that's computer, whether it's our own voice, that we actually do have the power to engage, inspire, and really hurt too, and to take responsibility for that. It's super, it's really important to be mindful of.
Yeah, so I think, one exercise that I do in my own personal life, which I started it as a parenting skill, is if you feel the need to really react to something, to sleep on it, just give it 24 hours, because I can almost guarantee you that 24 hours later, it's not going to seem like the big deal that it is. And if it does, then it warrants some sort of, response. But often it's just a matter of time.
Yeah. It's also a good rule when I'm impulse shopping. Do I really want that sweater? How badly do I want it?
A holiday shopping tip.
If I'm dreaming about it and then it comes back the next day, then I know I really want it.
100%.
No, but I mean, I'm obviously making light, but it's a really great policy. It's an important policy. Because instincts are often correct or worth working from, right, acting on. But that doesn't mean it has to be at the moment that you have the instinct. The instinct could take a little time to percolate and to grow and to really make sure nurture before you make sure that you're really in integrity in your decisions.
Yeah. Put it in context. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Sara, so much for being here today. How can people get a hold of you? Because what you are offering is really, really important, especially in this moment in time. And I know that there are so many people out there who could benefit from your services and your work and your expertise. So how can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think LinkedIn is probably the best way. So either on my personal page, and there are 2 R's and 2 N's in Herman, and or on there's a separate page for North by Northeast Communications with a direct link to the website and other ways to engage. So I think LinkedIn's probably the best starting point.
All right, fantastic. If you have more questions or want to reach out to Sara with find out more about what she does, please reach out to her in LinkedIn then. And thank you again, Sara, for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Merritt. It's been an absolute pleasure.
And I want to thank you all for being here this morning and every Friday for our Leadership Live Fridays. Again, my name is Merritt. I'm the founder and CEO of Master of One Coaching, where we focus on leadership coaching for people who are changing the world for the better. You can find out more information about us at masterofonecoaching.com. We're going to have a free training available hopefully next week. So check that out. It'll be on my website, or you can get it here on LinkedIn and Facebook. And our new program starting in January. So stay tuned for that. Have a great weekend, everybody. And thanks. We'll see you next week. Bye.